Okay, so in this video I'm going to show you how to braid a rubber motor. So why bother in the first place with, braiding a rubber motor? Well, the reason is you can use a much longer motor, okay, and a longer motor means more winds, so that's one of the advantages. Alright, the old time rule of thumb is basically you can get up to about 1.5 times the length from the rear peg to the nose. Now with these RC versions here, they're a little heavier, so I'm not going that long. But I'm still using fairly longer motors, okay? Now you might think with these folding prop type designs, what's the difference? There's going to be tension on the motor anyway. And here's the problem. If you use a much longer motor, you're going to have, for it to be the right tension, there's probably going to be a row of knots in it. And if those row of knots end up in the rear of the plane, your glide's going to be messed up and it's going to start stalling. So here's a nice example. This is a motor I'm using for the tube stake, okay? It's 36 strands of 1/8 inch, and the motor is actually 46 inches long. Now the distance from the nose to the rear peg on the tube stake is about 35 inches. So you can see this is 11 inches longer and there'd be a lot of slack. Alright, however the braided motor is pretty much just about 35 inches long. So it's going to fit perfectly from the nose to the rear peg without any slack. You got to make sure you don't make it too tight, otherwise the prop's not going to fold. So, and this is a simple way to do the braiding, so I'll show you how to do this, okay? Now here I'm making a motor. This is for the smaller tube stake that I have. So this is going to be 20 strands of 3/16, okay? They're going to be 34 inches long. Now in this case, the distance from the nose to the rear peg is about 27, 28 inches, so this is going to have about 6 inches of slack. So here's basically how I do it. Alright, so what I did is I took half the strands, alright, this is 5 loops, 10 strands, and I made them, 34 inches long here, and they're on the, this is actually a jig I have from Starlink Flight Tech, but you can just put 2 nails in a board, it's the same thing. And then what I do is I take the other 10 strands, okay, and I put those on as well. Now I like to tie the rear with a rubber band to just keep it all together before I do this. And I also like to put the hook on when I'm doing this. Now another thing that's very important is you have to have the loops on each side. You don't want it crossing over here, okay, otherwise it's going to climb up the hook. Now since I only have 5 strands here, I put 3 on one side, 2 on the other side. Alright, then when I put the other one on, I'll do the opposite to balance it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put about, I want to shorten it in this case, about 6 inches. So in my experience, about 30 winds will do it. If you want to shorten more, like a foot or so, then maybe 50 winds or more. There's a 2.6 times the motor, resting motor length rule, but that seems to be a little too much. I usually just end up using about 30 to 50 winds. Okay, so I'm going to put this on a winder. I'm going to put 30 winds on it, and then I'll show you the next part. Okay, so here what I did is I put 30 winds on the first set of 10 strands, and you can see I just took that on the stooge here. Alright, I just left the hook on there. You can also see I've clamped this to the countertop here so it doesn't move around. And now what I've done is I've got the next 10 strands. Alright, I hooked it to my winder here, and what I'm going to do is put the same number of turns, about 30 on this one, and then I'm going to join it on the hook with the other one, and I'll show you that. So I'm going to put 30 winds on this one now. Alright, so now what I did is I took the 2 strands and I hooked them together on the hook, and I kept it balanced, 10 strands on each side. And now all you got to do really is just let it unwind like this, okay? And as you can see then it braids up really nice. Alright, so now I'm going to take it off. I'm going to put some fasteners on the end. I'll show you that. Alright, so you can see here I have the motor braided. Okay, and there's a couple other things I like to do. So on the front end, what I like to do is I like to put a rubber band around it to keep the rubber from climbing up on the hook. Okay, and then in the rear of the motor I do 2 things. I put a band on just to keep the strands organized. And then I like to put another band on to make a little loop here, and this way it's easy to put on the stuffing stick, and get it in the plane. Now this motor was originally 34 inches long, okay, but now that it's braided, it's about 27 inches long, and I'm going to use that on this little tube stake here, and there's just about a 27-inch distance from the nose to the rear peg, and that's pretty much the length you want to make it, just enough to make it from the nose to the rear peg. If you make it too tight, you're not going to be able to fold the prop, and then you got to go back and loosen it up and redo it. Alright? So another couple of other nice things about braiding is it just makes the motor a lot easier to handle, okay? And it's easier to get the lube on there and wash it. Also, if the knots aren't distributed evenly here, you can just massage it a little bit to make sure everything's nice and evenly distributed like this. Okay, so this is really a lost art form, I think, from the 1930s. And I should say there are other ways to do it. You could make 4 loops and wind those and put those together. Some people even like to do it for each pair of strands. Even though with a 20 or 30 strand motor, that's not really practical, and I'm not convinced that gets anything for you. But if you at least do it with the half strands like I did, alright, you'll be able to use longer motors, you'll get more winds in it, and you'll get longer flight times. So I think this is a really nice thing to do.